Hello and welcome to Hawksong Weaving. My name is Took. I'm a disabled weaver who works exclusively with thrift store or secondhand yarn, and today I'll be making some of my best-selling e-reader sleeves that were inspired partly by growing up on Martha's Vineyard. I hope you enjoy. Life takes odd turns, but even tattered and worn yarn still has value. Tired joints and health flares don't have to stop the journey. Welcome to Hawksong Weaving, where all our paths are a little bit warped. To preface, when I say I partly grew up on Martha's Vineyard, people have a very set image of what that looks like. Erase that image from your mind. I was the single child of a single mother who was a cleaning lady in the summers and a paraeducator in the winters. I will be telling a funny story about encountering George Lucas as a kid later on, but no fancy houses apart from when we were house sitting. Most of my e-reader sleeves involve sewing two separate weaving blanks together, but for today I'm just doing the one. So, sorry for the pun, I start out by getting the center of my weaving blank lined up, and then I use a tight zigzag stitch, almost an applique stitch, to sew two lines about 1/4 of an inch apart down the center. This stabilizes the woven fabric and prevents it from unraveling, like a serger but less persnickety. For this project, I'm using a complementary color thread, so unfortunately it's less visible for the camera, but better for the project. I had to go grab my "don't ask me how much I paid for these" good shears and cut down the center. For those familiar with machine sewing, it's the opposite of stitching in the ditch, or at least that's how my brain makes sense of it. I make these e-reader sleeves a lot. They're some of the best sellers I have when I'm vending, but they're also so versatile and can be made in different sizes and in all sorts of patterns, and it's just a really great project. Now I have two equal lengths of woven fabric. I'm taking the same stitch settings on my sewing machine and sewing them together, first along the edge and then stitching in the ditch down the middle. I could sew this by hand, but I'd need to charge more than people would pay per bag, and time is money in this particular aspect. Like everything about how I make content, take what works for you and leave the rest. Because this project was inspired by Cape Cod, specifically Martha's Vineyard and the old houses there, I chose a lining of a sedate rose-printed muslin I got from the thrift store. The outer hand-woven fabric is meant to mimic shells and sand, with the pink of conch shells and the purple of clam shells. So the funny story regarding George Lucas. My mother couldn't afford camp all summer, so often I'd come along for house cleaning jobs. And I was undiagnosed autistic AF. So my go-to to keep myself entertained was to make dolls out of grass and play in the hedgerows making fairy houses and create my own little worlds. One day my mother came out to check on me to find an older man from the next house over watching me play. Naturally wary and ticked off, the older man was approached to which he asked if I did this a lot, and to which the answer was yes, and he said, "Huh, cool. Oh, sorry, George Lucas, I'm renting this house for the month." Shook my mother's hand and went back inside. And that's how George Lucas watched me play. I'm still somewhat annoyed that a movie about an autistic kid playing the hedgerows hasn't been made, but oh well. I'd like to thank you for watching. If you'd like to support my work, some free ways to do that are to like, subscribe, or follow, and share. This applies to other small artists as well. It's a great way to let the social media algorithms know that this is content worth watching. If you'd like to support me financially, per your request, there's a Buy Me a Coffee linked below, along with a link to the Hawksong Weaving Square site, where you can purchase unique woven products. I also have a Patreon that's linked below as well. There are currently 4 actual tiers and 1 very silly tier. These tiers include early access to videos, a weekly post of Life of the HR and OSHA Cats, a Kvetchy diary, being able to vote on projects, and fun snail mail. The actual tiers range from $2, $5, $10, and $15. The 5th tier is absolutely a joke, but just in case, in this economy, I won't say no. For $1,000 a month, you can tell me that I'm not actually disabled, I'm just lazy, and to try to whatever yoga, juice cleanse, snake oil nonsense fixed your cousin. I take the thrifted lining fabric and cut it or rip it, if it's muslin or flannel, to the width that I want. I'm making e-reader sleeves. These are all measured to fit all editions of Kindle and iPad minis, so I'm measuring a width of 9 inches. I then lay the lining fabric face down, kitty corner, and make a lining and woven fabric sandwich. This is a do as I say, not as I do moment. Please use clips or pins. Then, using the same zigzag stitch, I'm going to go around the woven fabric's edges, flipping the fabric around as I need to, and cutting the long end of the lining fabric once I get there. This is not fine sewing, this is effective sewing. I do the dainty stuff in my counted cross stitch in the evenings. Now that I'm coming around the corner, it becomes clear why I started at the point I did, as I've left an opening to flip the bag right side out. Now, rather than cutting the weaving blank at this point, because you'll note that it's not stabilized on the other side, I'm instead going to place the lining fabric next to it and repeat the whole process. Once I have 2 lining fabric strips sewn on with a stitch stitch making the woven fabric nice and stabilized, I will use my good shears and cut down the center, taking care not to cut into the zigzag stitching. I keep going down the woven fabric, sewing, cutting, until I don't have enough left to make another snap button bag. Then, depending on the amount left, I'll either cut my losses, make an odd-sized bag, or turn the remaining weaving blank into a few scrappy scented sachet bags for me to fill with scraps and scented herbs later. Once all the machine sewing was done, I cleared down my kitchen table, got as many of the scraps under proverbial lock and key as I could before Penelope Calico ate them and charged me an expensive vet visit, and got the bags to be over to my studio desk. I jumped the gun in regards to recording, but the next step was to turn the bags right side out. I use a hair stick for the fiddly bits of this, but you could use a chopstick or a knitting needle or a butter knife, pretty much anything long and pokey but not stabby. If your weave is loose, you can poke through it, but that's okay. I use a whip stitch with embroidery floss. The whip stitch is because that's what's quickest and easiest for me, but you could use a blanket stitch and get a nicer effect. For me, in order to sell these, I need to take some shortcuts in order to keep the price where people are actually going to buy them. It's an unfortunate aspect of this economy. Speaking of economy, another bonus, funny Martha's Vineyard rich people story. My mother cleaned the house of this one woman who would vent all the time about how none of her children visited, and that they were mad that she was spending their inheritance traveling the world. She then proceeded to pay me, a 7-year-old, $20 per baseboard that I dusted because I was, quote-unquote, a nice girl who seemed sweet. I made freaking bank that day. Sorry to her kids, though. The Kindle in the background is what I use to measure the width that I want for this project. For an e-reader sleeve, it's a formatting guide. Work smarter, not harder, and this way I don't need to take e-waste to the dump. I filmed this before I got the double mastectomy, and I'm watching how much I'm using my own body as a brace for this, so having to relearn how to sew these is going to be interesting, so stay tuned for a future video regarding that, I guess. I tuck the knots and the tail into the woven fabric because it's tidier that way, you don't get nearly as much nubbiness, and it just looks neater. I use old takeout containers for most of my craft storage. They're all the same size, machine washable, and just useful. I'm picking through which buttons I want. I know I wanted some form of abalone mother of pearl shell button, but I wasn't sure which one. I finally settled on one that has a bit more of a warm glow and dings on the edges for that Martha's Vineyard old house feel. For a flat button with holes, I'll start the knotted thread on the lining side of the flap, where it will be hidden underneath the outie part of the snap button. But for shank buttons, I'll sew the outie snap button on first, and then cover the stitches with the shank button. Sewing the outie part of the snap button, and we're in the home stretch, making sure that it's lined up fairly well and tucking that knot in behind the flat button on the outer rim of the e-reader sleeve. Sewing the innie part of the snap button, and bada bing bada boom, I have a Cape Cod old Martha's Vineyard house inspired e-reader bag. Thank you for coming along as I made this. I'm so glad for the odd turn that your path took that brought you here. Thank you for spending time with me at Hawksong Weaving, where we're all a bit warped, and I hope you have a truly excellent week.